is a joke, Elani.
I swear I did not know she was there. It was an accident.
You have brought shame upon this house.
I didn't mean to, Mama.
Enough, both of you. We must find a solution.
Once upon a time in the ancient city of Benin, a place where the red earth remembered the footsteps of ancestors and every old wall carried the breath of forgotten kings, there lived a young couple whose marriage was often spoken of with admiration and envy in equal measure. A couple people described as balanced, blessed, and dangerously happy. And their names were Osaz and Adijua, two souls who had found each other in a world that rarely allowed peace to last. Osaz was 32 years old, tall and broad-shouldered like an Iroko tree planted firmly against storms. His skin dark and smooth like freshly polished ebony, and his smile so bright that it softened even the hardest conversations. A man who worked as an architect designing homes that made people stop walking just to stare. Homes so beautiful they looked like dreams trapped in concrete. While his wife, Adujua, was a woman of intelligence and quiet fire, a pharmacist who owned a modest but successful drugstore called Healthy Life Pharmacy along the busy ring road. A woman who believed deeply that marriage should not erase a woman's identity and therefore carried her father's name with pride even after saying her vows. And together they lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom flat in the Ugbo area. Not extravagant but warm. A home where the television worked without needing to be slapped, where the kitchen always smelled of spices and patience, and where the bedrooms held peaceful sleep rather than restless arguments. And within those walls they raised their 2-year-old daughter, Ahi, a child with eyes so wide and expressive that elders joked she could see spirits. Eyes that seemed to search people's souls, as if asking questions too deep for her age. And for 3 solid years their marriage flowed smoothly, like palm wine poured gently into a clean calabash. Sweet, steady, and intoxicating, the kind of marriage people pointed at and whispered, "This is how it should be." Yet in Africa it is said that when life becomes too sweet, one must check the bush for hidden drummers, because happiness rarely announces how fragile it truly is. And the first quiet crack in their perfect picture appeared one cloudy October afternoon when Osaz returned home earlier than usual. His footsteps slower, his shoulders heavier, his face carrying the expression of a man wrestling with a decision he could not escape. And when he finally spoke, his words fell into the living room like a stone dropped into still water as he told Adujua that his mother would be coming to stay with them. A statement that made Adijua's heart leap sharply inside her chest, even as her face struggled to remain calm. Because every woman raised in tradition knows that a mother-in-law's visit is never just a visit, but a test, a trial, and sometimes a quiet war. And though Adijua asked careful questions about the length of the stay and sensed something dangerous hiding beneath Osaz's gentle explanations about help and family duty, she swallowed her resistance like bitter medicine, choosing peace over protest, because refusing would have branded her disrespectful, modern, and rebellious. Labels society is quick to throw at women who dare to protect their boundaries. And as she nodded and agreed to the visit with the condition that it last only 3 months, neither she nor Osaz could see the shadow already stretching toward their home. a shadow disguised as maternal love, tradition, and concern, one that would soon test their marriage, their health, and their understanding of what love truly meant, because unknown to them both, the house where peace once lived had already opened its door to a storm waiting patiently to tear everything apart. Mama arrived on a Saturday morning when the sun was still gentle and the air smelled of dew and distant cooking fires. Stepping out of the taxi with 3 oversized Ganamustgo bags that immediately raised silent questions in Odysseus' mind, because people who planned to stay briefly rarely arrived with luggage heavy enough to start a new life. Yet Mama's face wore a wide smile as she spread her arms and called Adujua, her beautiful daughter, praising her marriage and loudly thanking God that her son had not married one of those careless modern girls who did not know how to cook or respect their husbands. Words that sounded like compliments but carried sharp edges hidden beneath soft tones. And as Adijua forced a polite smile and returned the embrace, she noticed the smell of strong native soap mixed with something old and unfamiliar, a scent that made her nose itch with discomfort. But she ignored the warning in her chest and welcomed Mama inside, watching helplessly as the older woman settled into the spare bedroom with the confidence of someone who had already claimed ownership, rearranging furniture within hours, complaining that the mattress was too soft for her aging bones, requesting a mat instead, and questioning why there were no framed photographs of Osaza's late father on the wall. Moments that caused Osas and Adujua to exchange uneasy glances, the kind married couples share when they realize a decision cannot be undone. Yet the first month passed with deceptive calm as Mama woke before dawn each day, sweeping the compound until even dust felt unwelcome, banging pots and humming old songs loud enough to wake the entire house, cooking meals rich with ancestral skill and flavor, soups so thick and fragrant they carried memories of village feasts, food that made Osas praise her endlessly and neighbors peek through windows with envy, while Mama took over the care of little Ahi with intense devotion, bathing her, feeding her, singing to her, whispering prayers into her tiny ears, and slowly becoming the center of the child's attention until Ahi began calling her grandma instead of Mama. A change that pierced Adijua's heart like a small thorn she pretended not to feel, choosing silence because she believed patience would preserve peace. And for a while it seemed her sacrifice was working, because Mama smiled often, laughed loudly, and played the role of the helpful mother-in-law perfectly. But like darkness creeping in quietly at sunset, the tone began to shift as Mama's words grew sharper and her advice more frequent. Comments delivered with a smile but soaked in judgment, questioning how Adijua fried plantain, how she ironed her husband's clothes, why she woke up at what Mama considered an indecent hour for a wife, always ending with phrases like, "I'm only helping you," or "in our time." Things were different, each sentence pressing gently but persistently against Adijua's confidence. And when Adijua tried to explain herself or defend her routines, Mama would laugh softly and remind her that modern women believed too much in independence and forgot their place. Words that felt like slow poison dripping into Adijua's spirit. Yet what hurt most was Osaza's growing silence, because whenever Adijua tried to confide in him, he brushed it aside, insisting his mother meant well and advising her not to take things personally, unknowingly choosing comfort over truth. And as the weeks passed, Mama's criticisms grew bolder, openly complaining about Adishua's cooking, the cleanliness of the house, even questioning her competence as a mother whenever Ahi caught a cold or cried too long, all while presenting herself as the savior who had come just in time. And slowly, almost invisibly, Osaz began repeating his mother's words, suggesting Adishua wake earlier, let Mama handle the cooking, reduce her time at the pharmacy, until Adishua felt like a stranger in her own home, watching her marriage shift under her feet like unstable sand, unaware that Mama's presence was no longer just critical but strategic, her smiles calculated, her kindness a mask, and her stay never meant to be temporary, because by the end of that second month, the house no longer felt like a home but like a quiet battlefield, where one woman fought for survival and the other waited patiently for her moment to strike. By the time the third month arrived, the house in Benin that once breathed laughter now felt heavy with unspoken tension, and Adishua's body began to betray her in quiet, frightening ways that no amount of rest could explain, because she woke each morning feeling as though her strength had been quietly drained overnight, her head pounding like a distant drum beaten without rhythm, her stomach unsettled, her patience thinning like worn cloth. And at first she blamed stress, long hours at the pharmacy, and the emotional weight of living under constant judgment, never suspecting that the danger she faced was not spiritual or emotional alone, but painfully physical, hidden inside the food she ate with trust, served by hands that smiled while plotting her destruction, and Mama watched everything with sharp, calculating eyes, noting Adishua's growing weakness, her slower steps, her quieter voice, her increasing frustration. And instead of concern, she felt satisfaction, because to Mama, Adishua's suffering was proof that the plan was working exactly as intended, and Osaz, blinded by routine and reassured by his mother's flawless performance as the caring elder, failed to notice the alarming changes in his wife, dismissing her complaints as tiredness and advising her gently to rest more and argue less, words that unknowingly pushed her closer to isolation, until fate intervened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Adishua closed her pharmacy early because her body simply refused to cooperate, her head spinning and her stomach twisting with unnatural discomfort. And when she entered the house, expecting silence, she heard Mama's voice drifting from the kitchen, low and deliberate, speaking on the phone in Edo language with the calm confidence of someone discussing a successful business deal. And curiosity mixed with unease pulled Adishua closer, her footsteps careful, her heart beating faster with each word she caught. And then the truth crashed into her like cold water as Mama laughed softly and said that the girl was breaking down just as planned, explaining with terrifying ease how she had been adding small amounts of bitter leaf extract into Adishua's food, never enough to kill her but enough to weaken her body, cloud her mind, and make her irritable, ensuring that Osaz would slowly begin to see his wife as unstable, disrespectful, and difficult. And Adishua's world froze in that narrow corridor as shock stole the air from her lungs, because this was no longer about insults or control, but about calculated poisoning disguised as care. And as Mama continued bragging about planting seeds of doubt in her son's mind and reclaiming him fully, Odysseus' fear transformed into cold clarity, the kind that comes when survival demands intelligence rather than panic. And with trembling hands, she quietly pulled out her phone and began recording every word, capturing Mama's confession, her jealousy, her possessive rage, and her chilling declaration that she would either break Odysseus into obedience or drive her out entirely. And by the time the call ended, Odysseus understood that the woman living in her house was not simply difficult or traditional, but deeply dangerous. A predator hiding behind motherhood. And that evening when Osas returned from work, he found his wife waiting in the bedroom with a stillness that felt unnatural. Her face calm, but her eyes burning with something fierce and final. And when she asked him to sit and listen, insisting that what she was about to show him would force a choice he could no longer avoid, confusion clouded his face until Mama's recorded voice filled the room, speaking of poison, manipulation, and ownership with unapologetic cruelty. And as the recording played, Osas's expression shifted rapidly through disbelief, denial, horror, and shame, his mind struggling to reconcile the loving mother he knew with the monster revealed by her own words. And when the truth finally settled, it broke something deep inside him, leaving him staring at his wife as though seeing her pain for the first time. Just as the bedroom door burst open and Mama stood there listening, her mask finally discarded, her eyes cold, her voice unapologetic as she admitted everything and declared her actions justified. And in that moment, the house held its breath, because what stood between Osas and the future was no longer confusion, but choice. And the battle that had been fought in whispers was about to explode into the open. The moment Mama stepped fully into the bedroom, the air thickened, as if the walls themselves sensed the weight of the truth now exposed. And Osas stood frozen between the two women who defined his life, his wife trembling with controlled rage, and his mother standing tall with unapologetic defiance, her eyes sharp and blazing with a madness born not of confusion but of possession. And when she spoke, her voice was cold and steady, confirming every word of the recording without shame, admitting that she had poisoned Odysseus slowly, not to kill her, but to weaken her body and spirit, to bend her will and reclaim her son piece by piece. And Osas felt something inside him crack as the image of the loving, sacrificial mother he carried in his heart shattered violently against the reality before his eyes. Because this was no misunderstanding or exaggeration, but a deliberate betrayal that crossed every boundary of love, tradition, and humanity. And when he asked her how she could harm the mother of her own grandchild, Mama exploded with years of suppressed jealousy, screaming that Odysseus was an intruder who had stolen what belonged to her, accusing marriage of robbing her of attention, loyalty, and control, her tears flowing not with remorse but with rage and entitlement, as she recounted how Osas once called daily, visited often, and provided without hesitation before another woman dared to take priority in his life. And Odysseus listened with shaking hands as realization settled in that this hatred had never been about her flaws, but about Mama's refusal to release her son. And when Mama lunged forward in a moment of uncontrollable fury, Osas reacted on instinct, stepping between them with his arms raised and his voice thunderous, ordering his mother to stop and finally choosing a side, not out of anger alone, but out of moral clarity, declaring that tradition could never justify abuse and that motherhood did not grant permission to destroy. And for the first time, Mama looked truly shocked, staring at her son as though seeing a stranger, her face twisting into something bitter and unrecognizable as she accused him of betrayal, screaming that he had chosen a woman over his own blood. But Osas stood firm, his decision unshaken, as he told her that she had made her own choice the moment she decided to poison his wife. And with that final boundary drawn, he ordered her to pack her things and leave immediately, ignoring her curses, her threats, and her promises of regret. And Mama stormed through the house like a wounded animal, throwing clothes into her Ganamustgo bags, shouting ancient curses in Edo language so loud that neighbors gathered outside in fear and curiosity, while little Ahi cried from the other room, sensing the violence of emotions she could not understand. And as the taxi carried Mama away into the darkness, her voice still echoing in the night, Adishua's strength finally gave way and she collapsed into Osas's arms, her tears pouring freely for the first time in months, not just from fear, but from the release of survival, while Osas held her tightly, haunted by guilt for the pain his blindness had allowed, knowing that the woman who gave him life had nearly destroyed the family he vowed to protect. And in the days that followed, the house felt strangely quiet, as though recovering from a storm that had uprooted something poisonous from its foundation. Yet the silence carried its own weight as Osas wrestled with grief and disbelief, seeking therapy to process the truth of his mother's actions, while Adujua visited the hospital where tests confirmed the presence of bitter leaf extract in her system, validating her suffering and proving that had the poisoning continued, the damage could have been far worse. And together they faced judgment from relatives who refused to believe the story, accusing Adijua of manipulation and Osas of disrespect. But this time he did not waver, choosing to protect his wife and child with the same strength he once reserved only for tradition, understanding at last that family is not defined by blood alone, but by safety, loyalty, and love. And though the scars remained, the marriage had survived its darkest night, emerging wounded but unbroken, anchored by a truth that could no longer be ignored. The days that followed Mama's dramatic departure were not filled with instant peace, as many people expect after a great evil is removed, but with silence heavy enough to sit on the chest, because healing, like old African wounds, does not close simply because the knife has been taken away. And in that quiet house, Osas and Adujua were forced to face the truth of what had almost destroyed them, a truth that demanded responsibility, courage, and deep emotional work rather than celebration. As Osas battled guilt that gnawed at his spirit like termites in wood, replaying moments where he had ignored his wife's pain in favor of comfort and tradition, while Adujua focused on rebuilding her strength, both physical and emotional, following medical treatment that confirmed prolonged ingestion of bitter leaf extract had weakened her system, but thankfully not caused permanent damage. And though relief washed over them, it was quickly followed by anger at how close everything had come to irreversible tragedy. And together they entered counseling, learning how silence, dismissal, and blind loyalty had opened the door for manipulation. Learning that marriage in African tradition was never meant to be a competition between mother and wife, but a sacred union, requiring protection from any force that threatened its balance. And outside their home, the story spread quickly, dividing relatives and neighbors into believers and doubters. some condemning Mama's actions, while others accused Adijua of poisoning Osaze's mind against his mother, proving once again that society often prefers comfortable lies over painful truth. Yet Osaz stood firm like an ancient baobab tree rooted deeply in moral clarity, refusing to allow pressure or guilt to reopen doors that nearly cost his family everything. And when months later Mama attempted to return with messages of apology and promises of change, Osaz listened without anger but also without illusion, calmly explaining that love does not mean access and forgiveness does not erase consequences, telling her that until she sought real healing for her obsession and control, she would not be allowed near his wife or child. A boundary that shocked many but quietly inspired others who had suffered similar silent battles. And slowly, as seasons changed, peace returned to the house. Not the fragile peace of ignorance, but the strong peace of awareness. As Aduja reopened her pharmacy with renewed confidence, no longer shrinking herself to please others, while Osaz became more present as a husband and father, understanding that leadership in marriage meant protection, not neutrality, and little Ahi grew in a home where love was no longer poisoned by fear. And in time the story became a lesson whispered among women and debated among men, a reminder passed like oral history that true love builds rather than destroys, that any affection demanding suffering is not love but control, and that a man must indeed leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, not by abandoning his parents, but by refusing to allow misplaced loyalty to destroy the family he is building. And as the ancestors would say, the hand that rocks the cradle must never become the hand that spills poison. For when jealousy wears the mask of care, wisdom must tear it away. And those who choose peace over tradition, twisted by ego, will always stand justified before time, truth, and the spirits that watch quietly from the shadows.